Welcome to EDAB video number 7. Data analysis and business intelligence made easy with Excel Power Tools. And you are not going to believe it, we get to learn how to do data modeling. Now, what is data modeling? That's like last video where we had some bad data and we had to convert it into a single proper data set. Or when we had multiple text files and we needed to convert that raw data into a single proper data set that we could use for our reporting. But what if we had 1, 2, 3 different tables, and we needed raw data from each one of the tables to create our report, dashboard, or analytics? Well, we'd have to decide which tool we want to use, VLOOKUP spreadsheet function, Power Query, or the amazing Power Pivot. Now, below this video, you can download this zip folder, right-click to extract all. And here's all the files that we'll use for this video, including an Access file where we import some data, our PDF notes with a written and pictorial description of the video, and the start file that we'll use to do all of our examples. Now, here are the topics for this video. And don't forget, below each video, now this is Excel Basics 1, but below our video, if you look for that Show More button, you click, and there's a time hyperlink table of contents. If you like what you see, click that subscribe button and the bell icon. In example number 1, we'll use VLOOKUP. We'll create these formulas, adding extra columns to create one single proper data set. In our second example, we'll have some raw data in a single table in Excel. And we'll have 2 tables from an Access database. We'll have Power Query go and get all of this data. And through these steps in Power Query, we'll convert it to a proper data set. Then from the proper data set, we'll load it directly to a PivotTable cache, and we'll create our reports. And in our last example, we'll have 1, 2, 3 tables in Excel, and we'll use this amazing button in the Data Ribbon tab, Relationships. This button will create a one-to-many relationship between our fact table and our 2-dimension tables. We'll then be able to pull fields from 3 different tables into the same pivot table. Now, the fundamental problem we have in this video is that we have multiple tables that we need to use to make our pivot table reports. And when we have multiple tables, we have 3 different potential solutions: VLOOKUP, Power Query, and Power Pivot. Now, each one of these solutions has a particular situation where it will be efficient to use that solution. VLOOKUP, when you have about 50,000 rows of data or less, VLOOKUP is fine. When your tables are already in the Excel spreadsheet, VLOOKUP is fine. And when you want to use one table in the pivot table field list, VLOOKUP is great. Now, we can also use Power Query with the very specific merge feature. And we use this when the tables are coming from external data sources. Because if we're going to use Power Query to import it in the first place, instead of adding VLOOKUP as extra columns, we'll use the merge feature, which inside of Power Query adds the same columns that VLOOKUP would. And if we're using merge, that means we want one table in the pivot table field list. Now, later we'll see that Power Query can import multiple tables without using the merge feature. Now, our final option when we have multiple tables is Power Pivot and the data model with the relationship feature and implicit measure feature. Now, we can use this option when you have more than about 50,000 records and when you want to have multiple tables in a pivot table field list. So this option will allow us to pull all of the tables into the pivot table field list. Whereas with Power Query and VLOOKUP, we'll construct a single table that we'll use in our pivot table field list. Now, Power Pivot with relationship and implicit measure. This is the simplest and easy way to use Power Pivot. In our next couple of videos, we'll see how to use Power Pivot and Power BI Desktop when we have big data, like millions of rows of data. And we will actually explicitly build our formulas called explicit measures. In this example, we're just using Power Pivot because the relationship feature can replace either merge or VLOOKUP. We're going to start our examples in the start file, and we're going to start on the sheet example 1 VLOOKUP. Now in our first example, the business situation is that Boomerang Incorporated sells boomerang products on 4 different websites: Gel Boomerangs, Colorado Boomerangs, Amazon, and eBay. Our goal is to create a total revenue report by category and website, and a similar report that shows the percent revenue of grand total. The problem is we have 3 tables with raw data. Solution number 1 is VLOOKUP. And we're going to use VLOOKUP because this table, control down arrow, has about 43,000 rows. So that's not too much data for VLOOKUP. And our tables are already in the Excel spreadsheet. Now, in order to make everything dynamic, if we get new data, we're first going to convert this transaction table to an Excel table. Click in a single cell, Control T, and Enter. Be sure to come up to Design Properties, and we're going to name this. I named it F Transactions with a V at the end, so I know this table is for our VLOOKUP example. Now we have our 1, 2, 3 different Excel tables with their expandable and contractible ranges. Now this is our F transaction table, and we want to use this in our pivot table field list. But guess what? This is an incomplete table. For example, there are units, but how are we going to calculate revenue? We're actually going to have to pull the price for each one of these products into the correct row and then calculate revenue. We're also going to have to pull product category and website name as extra columns into our transaction table. Those 2 columns we'll use as our conditions and criteria for the row and column area of our pivot table. What this means is that we have to do lookup. For example, here's the website ID, and I can see many repeats, CB69, CB69, many repeats. For each row, I want the correct website name. Well, that means in this column, for each row, I'm going to have to look up website ID, find a match in the first column of the lookup table, go over to the second column, and for CB69, of course, that means grabbing Colorado Boomerangs and bringing it back to each one of the rows. Now, the perfect spreadsheet function for looking something up in a vertical lookup table is the VLOOKUP function. Yes, V means vertical. Now we're going to call this column website name, and watch this. This is an Excel table, so as soon as I start typing a new name to the right, when I hit Enter, that column is immediately incorporated as a new column into the table object. All right, so in the first row, we're going to type $VL. I see in the drop-down highlighted in blue the name of the function, so I hit Tab. Now the VLOOKUP function has 4 arguments. The first argument we need to enter is called the lookup value. Now, just like we would have to look at the item we're trying to match in the first column of the lookup table if we were doing this by hand, VLOOKUP needs to do the same thing. So I'm going to give it website ID. Now, this is an Excel table, so when I click in the cell, that's called Table Formula Nomenclature. Now, back in video number 3, we turned this feature off and used straight cell references. But we want to look at how table formula nomenclature works in this formula example. The @ symbol means when it looks in this row in the website ID column, it'll always get the item for this row. When it copies the formula down, it will get the next item, AM11. That's the lookup value, comma. Table array argument, that's where we put our lookup table. And this is an Excel table, so this is a great trick. Point your cursor in the upper left-hand corner, and when you see that diagonal black arrow, you can click, and it highlights the entire table. Over here, we see the table formula nomenclature for please give me the entire table except for the field names. Now I'm going to type a comma, column index number. Now, if we were doing this manually, we would read the column website name. After finding the match for CB69 for this first record, we would then go and get Colorado Boomerang and bring it back. But VLOOKUP doesn't know how to do that unless you give it the column index number. And you have to count on your fingers 1, 2, because website name column is the second column in the lookup table. When I put a 2 into column index number, that instructs VLOOKUP to always get whatever the item is from the second column and bring it back to the cell. Now we have to type a comma to get to the fourth argument. And there's two different types of lookup. Approximate match lookup, that's for tax rates and commissions. That's not what we're doing here. And I'm going to down arrow exact match. That's what we're doing. We're trying to find exactly the characters CB69 in the first column of the lookup table. Now, you can use true or the number equivalent 1. That will tell VLOOKUP to do approximate. Or in our case, you can put false or a 0. Both of those tell VLOOKUP, please do exact match lookup. Close parentheses. I'm done with my formula. Now, what is VLOOKUP doing here? Actually, it knows first that it's doing exact match. So when we give it a lookup value of CB69 and a table to look up, VLOOKUP races through the first column of the lookup table when it finds a match. Then, because we put a 2 here, it knows to go 1, 2 to the second column, get Colorado boomerangs, and bring it back to the cell. That's exact match. Now watch this. This is an Excel table, so when I simply hit Enter, it fills the column with the correct website name. Now I'm going to come up between F and G and double click. Now I want to click in the top cell, Control down arrow, and in the last cell I want to hit the F2 key. I'm just verifying that the relative cell reference is working and that table is still locked on our lookup table. That is working. Control Enter, Control up arrow. Now that's the only item we're looking up from the website table. From this table, we have to look up price and product category. Now I hid some columns between G and K, so let's select G to K, then right-click and unhide. I'm going to change the size of the J column. All right, our second column we're going to add in our data modeling process is called product category, and enter equals VL tab. I'm going to left arrow over, and this time we're getting product ID. That's the lookup value, comma, the table array. I want the entire product table. I see that diagonal arrow, click. It puts the table in, comma. Now for column index number, we're getting price. So I have to count on my fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's in the fifth column. So I have to give VLOOKUP a 5. That tells VLOOKUP, go get whatever's in the fifth column. Now, comma, lookup range, 0 for exact match. Close parentheses. And when I hit Enter, it fills down. Whoa, I made an error there. Product category is not in the fifth, it's in the fourth. No problem. In the top cell, I hit F2, and I'm going to change this one to 4. I'm counting on my fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now when I hit Enter, it will repopulate. That is totally cool. Now we need to get price. So I type price, Enter, equals VL tab. I'm going to look up using my left arrow, going and getting product ID. There's my table formula nomenclature for relative cell reference, comma, the table, the whole product table, comma. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Price is in the fifth column. So for column index number, when I put a 5, VLOOKUP will obey. It will go get whatever's in the fifth column, comma, 0 for exact match, close parentheses, and Enter. Now the last column we need for our data modeling is I need to multiply units and price, because our pivot table is going to be website name, product category, and then add total revenue. Revenue and Enter. Now equals, and I'm simply going to left arrow. And wait a second. That table formula nomenclature for relative cell reference is different than when I use it inside my formulas over here. And here's why. There's only one square bracket because the name of this column, price, is not repeated in any other column header. If I arrow over to product category, well, product category is here and it's over here. So there's a slightly different table formula nomenclature when you're using a relative cell reference and there's duplicate column names in the Excel workbook, or you're referencing a column that doesn't have a duplicate anywhere else. Times left arrow to get units. That formula will work. So when I hit Enter, now I have my total revenue. Guess what? we have completed data modeling using spreadsheet formulas by adding 1, 2, 3, 4 different columns. Now we have our complete one transaction table. I want to create a pivot table on a new sheet. So I'm going to click in a single cell, insert pivot table, or we're going to use our keyboard, Alt and V. It got the table right. The default is new sheet. I can click OK with my mouse, but since that button is highlighted, I can simply use the Enter key. There's our pivot table field list. I think the first thing I'm going to do is come down here, double click, and we'll rename this. I called it crosstab for revenue with a V because this is our VLOOKUP solution. There is our column that we added, and we're totally allowed to drag and drop down to rows. Instantly, I get a unique list. Product category down to rows. Instantly, I get a unique list. I made a mistake. Website's supposed to be over in columns, so I'm going to pivot the pivot table. Now I get my cross tab. I drag revenue down to values. Right click to add number formatting. Something like number, comma separator, 0 decimals. Click OK. Up in the title, I'm going to come up to the formula bar and indicate the unit and enter. Now our goal is to have the crosstab for revenue, but I also want to express each individual item inside the pivot table, down in the column totals and the row totals, as a percentage of the grand overall total. I do not want to have to repeat all the steps to create this, so this is a great trick. Highlight the pivot table, Control-C, and at least 3 rows down, Control-V. Everything's looking good except for the calculation. So I come inside the pivot table, right-click. Summarize values is how we change the aggregate function. Show values as, lots of amazing calculations for us. And the one we want, percent of grand total. I click. That 7.33% represents an AND logical test where we're taking the total revenue for Colorado boomerangs and the distance category and comparing it to the grand overall total. Now that's doing an AND logical test with 2 conditions, but of course, the row totals at the end. That's the total of all the beginner revenue compared to the grand overall total. Similarly, right here, the total revenue for Colorado boomerangs is compared to the grand overall total, 30.17%. All right, that's our first example with VLOOKUP. Let's go over to our second example, EX2 Power Query. Now for our Power Query example, we have the same business situation, goal, and problem. The solution, however, will be Power Query. We'll use Power Query to import tables from an Access database and Excel. We'll bring them into the Power Query editor. Then we'll use the Merge feature and the Add Column feature. Now, before we import our data from Access, I actually want to cheat and go over to the Power Pivot Relationships tab. And here's the same 3 tables we're using for all 3 examples. And we want to notice something about the transaction table and our dimension or lookup table website. In our VLOOKUP example, we noticed that there are many repeats of website ID in the transaction table. Over here in the dimension table or lookup table, the first column always has a unique list of items. Notice there's only one CB69, one GB43. But over here in the transaction table, we're allowed to have many duplicates of our website ID. That just means we had many sales at this particular website. In databasing and data warehousing and data analysis, there's a special name where you have the same column in 2 tables, and one table is a lookup table with a unique list, and the other table has many duplicates. The special name is a one-to-many relationship. Now, in our third example, we'll use a feature inside of Excel and Power Pivot called the relationship feature. But now we want to go look at our Access database, which has the data we want to import for our Power Query example. Now we can double-click our Access file to open it. Access is a database that holds tables with raw data. If we double-click and open up the products table, we could see here's the first column with product ID. This is our unique list in our lookup table or dimension table. This is going to be the one side of the relationship. If we double-click and open up F transactions, here's the many side. We have many repeats in the product column because we sold the product many times. In databasing and also in Excel, if we use the relationship feature, we can use something called a relationship to substitute for VLOOKUP. Now, this button over here in Access is the same button we'll see in Excel when we use relationships. I'm going to click, and we can see visually here there's a one-to-many relationship. When I double click, you can see the relationship is between product ID. And what this means for us when we're importing this data from Access over into Power Query is these two tables can see each other. So when I import transactions, if I want to do VLOOKUP to get one of these columns, for example, the product category and price, these two columns will already be in the fTransactions table because there's a relationship. So this is the first time we've seen this relationship. And again, we'll see it in Excel also. But this is a substitute for what we did with the VLOOKUP function. One other thing here in Access, I want you to notice that's an icon that shows a key. For a lookup table that has a first column with a unique list, that's called a primary key. When we use this primary key, product ID, over in our transaction table right there, remember we have many duplicates. We can sell that product many times. On the many side, it's called a foreign key. Primary key, foreign key. And most tables in a database have a primary key. Even this fTransaction has an ID for each one of the transactions. Now we're going to close this and go back over to Excel. Now up in the Data Ribbon tab, Get and Transform, we have to bring this Excel table and those two tables from Access into the Power Query editor and then do a bunch of steps to merge those tables. So let's first go to Get Data from Database. And we're going to get the data from an Access database. Click, navigate to the Access database, double click. Now the Navigator dialog box looks into the Access database. Now we only have two tables there. Sometimes databases have lots of different objects. And guess what? All we need to do is import the fTransactions. Because remember, there's a relationship between these two tables. And when I pull fTransactions into Power Query, it'll pull all the columns from dProduct also. Now we want to click Transform Data. Sometimes this is the Edit button. We do not want to load this. So I'm going to click Transform Data. Here's our Power Query editor. Over here on the left, we see we have one query. There's our table. There's the name. And I'm going to change this name. I'm going to put an A at the end. So this will be the name of our query, fTransactions A. Now it has two steps. Those steps are OK. The first thing we want to do is we don't need ID. So point to ID, right-click, remove. I can see it added a step in the applied steps list. Now products. That little icon right there means a record. And look at this. Don't click on the green value. Click off to the side in the white. And remember, there's a one-to-many relationship. And the products is the one side. So what did it pull? There it is, dProduct on the many side, but it pulled the entire record from that lookup table. When we go down to the next product ID, clicking off to the side, there it is. What this means is that we can choose from all of the columns which ones we want to import. We want to import product category and price. The way we do that is we click our double sideways arrow, the Expand button. Click. I want to uncheck Use Original Column Name. That would have dProducts as a prefix, and I don't want that. Now I'm going to uncheck Select All, select Price and Product Category. By checking this, it's as if we're doing a VLOOKUP. When I click OK, here in the Power Query Editor, we can see we have our product category and our price. Now this is two tables. We still need to add a column from the website table, and then we need to make a calculation to calculate revenue. But we have to go back over to Excel and load that other table. So guess what? We're going to come up to Close and Load to. And this is an example where we don't want to load it anywhere except for a connection. We are not done with transforming that table inside the Power Query Editor. So when we load as Create a Connection Only, it's just connecting to that data source. All right, I'm going to click OK. Over in Queries and Connection, I can see my Connection Only query. Now I'm going to click in one cell in my Excel table from the Excel sheet, Data Ribbon tab, Get and Transform. my window is not expanded. So we have to hover, and there it is, from table range. I'm going to click. Now on the left, I'm going to expand queries. We can see that we have 2 queries here. We're going to leave this name exactly the same. The steps are OK because we have 2 columns, and they're both text. Now I need to load this. Close and load to, also as only create a connection. Click OK. Now we're going to manually merge, whereas when we pulled data from a database that had a relationship, it just automatically offered us to do the merge. But now we have 2 queries inside of Power Query. That means we're allowed to manually merge. So I'm going to double click F Transactions A. This opens up the Power Query editor. I'm going to open up on the left the queries. And now the F Transactions A, this query is partially done. I need to add those extra columns. So in the Home Ribbon tab, Combine, we come up to Merge Queries dropdown, and I want to merge queries. If I selected Merge Queries as New, it would keep these 2 queries as separate connection only, and then add a third one. But I'm actually going to transform this one, and later we'll load it. So I'm going to say Merge Queries. Here's our F Transaction A. From the dropdown, we're going to select our second table, D Website PQ. Now how we simulate VLOOKUP, or the relationship we saw in Access, is we select the column. This is the many side. We can see there's duplicates for CB69. Then we select in the lookup table or dimension table the primary key, the first column with a unique list. Notice there's exactly 1 of each. By selecting these 2 columns inside of Merge, we're simulating relationships and VLOOKUP. Now, there are lots of different join kinds, and there's a picture in the PDF notes that describes each one of these. The one we want is left outer. That means all from the first and matching records from the second. Now, we happen to have every single one of our items in the primary key used in our transaction table. So when it says matching from the second, it'll just take all of these. The matching from the second is in case we have something in the lookup table that's not over here. Then that would not be pulled as part of the merge. All right, now we're going to do this. We're going to click OK. Now if we come off to the side, not where it says table, but off to the side and click, we can see there is our 1 record that's matched. Now this is a different icon here. This pulled as part of our merge the full table, but it just shows the 1 record. If I click on the next one, I can see there's the next record. Now when we merged 2 tables, we got a different table icon. This is a table. When we pulled a single table that had a relationship from a database, that was a single record. But in both cases, we get a single matched record from the one side. But guess what? We're allowed to use this expand button just like we did when we imported data from our Access database. Uncheck Use Original, and the only column we want is website name. Now when I click OK, from our manual merge, we put all the website names into our 1 table. Now we have a few more transformations we need to do. We need to multiply units and price. Now in Excel, we created a formula. Watch this in Power Query. I'm going to select units, then holding the Control key, I'm going to click on price. And there's an Add Column ribbon tab. I click, and from the From Number group, I click the Standard dropdown, and I say I want to multiply. When I click Multiply here, it adds a new column, multiplying. I see my new step in the Applied Steps. Now let's double click this, and we're going to call this Revenue, and Enter. Now I want to go through each one of the columns, making sure that we have the correct name, and we do. Now we want to go through each column and make sure we have the right data type. For date, I'm going to change it from date and time to just date. Text. This is units. I do not want decimal. I want to change this to a whole number. Text. I'm going to change the price from decimal to currency. The difference is decimal number can have up to 15 digits. Currency can have up to 4 digits to the right of the decimal point. Change it to currency. Same with revenue. I'm going to click, change it to currency. Now we have all of our steps. We have fully transformed from 3 different tables all of our raw data into 1 single table. Now I want to load it to a pivot table cache. Oh, but guess what? We already loaded this as a connection only. So I'm going to go up to Home, click the Close and Load, which loads it to its previous location. Then I'm going to come over and right-click, Load To. So we're changing the load location. Pivot Table Report. Let's do it on a new worksheet. Click OK. Now I immediately want to come down and name this Crosstab Revenue PQ. Now we have our 3 tables converted into a single table in our Pivot Table field list. I'm going to drag product category down to rows, website name down to columns, revenue down to values. Right-click, number formatting. We'll do number, 0 decimals, click OK. I'll indicate the unit and enter. Now I want to highlight the pivot table, copy, go a few rows below, Control V, inside the values area, right-click, show values as, % of grand total. And so there in our second example, we used Power Query to take 3 tables, transform it into a single table, load it to Pivot Table Cache, and create our reports. Now let's go over to our third amazing example. Example 3, Power Pivot. Now we have the same business situation, goal, and problem, but our solution is going to involve Power Pivot. Now actually, I don't see my Power Pivot ribbon tab because the real solution we're going to use here is something called the Relationship button. Now we're using Office 365, so I will show you how to add your Power Pivot ribbon tab after we use the Relationship button. Because guess what? In all versions since Excel 2013, we can use the Relationship button to bring multiple tables into our Pivot Table field list. So I'm going to show you how to use the relationships to connect all these, use them for our reporting. And then after we're done, I'm going to open up the Power Pivot ribbon tab and show you what happens behind the scenes when you use the Relationship button. All right, in order to use the Relationship button, you have to have all of your data sets converted to Excel tables. So we don't even have to click in one of the data sets. We just go up and click our Relationship button. The Manage Relationships dialog box comes up, and we click New. Now we have to decide, since we're trying, just like we did with Merge, VLOOKUP, and like we saw in Access, we're trying to connect Product ID, this is the many side, and Product ID, this is the one side. But it's asking for 2 tables, table and related table. So we have to decide which tables to put where. Now, unfortunately, Microsoft called this related table. If they were building this dialog box from the point of view of an Excel user, they would have called this lookup table. If they had built this dialog box from the point of view of database people, they would have called this dimension table. But Microsoft decided to call this related table. So you just have to remember what goes into the related table, the lookup table, or the dimension table. That means the first table is going to be our fact table. For us, it's going to be our transaction. Now, this is the relationship example, so I'm going to use ftransaction R. Then from the related table, since I want to connect it to our products, I'm going to use the first one, dProduct R. That dProduct R is our lookup table or dimension table. So that's why we put it in related table. Then we need the 2 columns. They're both of the product ID. So I select product ID, product ID. Now notice this says foreign, this says primary. This is database terminology. Primary key means that first column with a unique list. Foreign means this primary key is a foreign over here. That's the many side. We can have many duplicates. Now that's it. When we create a relationship like this, this is a 1 from the lookup table, dimension table, to many, that's our transaction table, 1 to many relationship. When I click OK, there's a couple things that are going to happen. One is these tables will be loaded to a behind-the-scenes database called the data model. Now, so far in the class, we have our data in an Excel sheet, and then we make a pivot table. We loaded data to the pivot table cache. Well, that's directly in the pivot table cache, so we make a pivot table. But here, this is a third option. When we use relationships, it's not only going to take these 2 tables and store them in the data model, but it's also going to store the relationship between the two tables in the behind-the-scenes data model. So I'm going to click OK. And there it is. If we opened up our pivot table field list right now, we'd see these two tables. Now we have one more relationship between transactions and website. So I click New. And when we click the dropdown, I want you to notice something. The tables that before said Worksheet now say Data Model. That's because when we created our first relationship, they were not in the data model, but now they are. So I'm going to click F Transaction. And our related table, well, we haven't added the website table to our data model yet. So this is the worksheet table, website, R for relationship example. So I select. And then the two columns, the primary key first. This is the website ID from the first column of our lookup table. And then the foreign key, this is in the transaction table, website ID. Now notice that still says worksheet. When I click OK, it creates the relationship. If I click the edit, we can now see it says data model. All right, now I'm going to click OK. We've created our relationships. Click Close. Now I want you to click in a cell not inside the table, somewhere way outside the table. And now we want to use our keyboard to create a pivot table on a new sheet. Alt and V. And look at that. By default, if you open up the Create Pivot Table dialog box and your cell wasn't in a table, and you have something in the data model, it defaults to the data model. New worksheet, click OK. Now, when you do this, you see all of the tables available from this Excel workbook, including the R ones, which are the ones from our data model. Now, I'm using the latest version of Office 365, and they changed the icons. In earlier versions, they used to have a darker line at the top, which visually indicated that these were from the data model. But we were careful in our naming. So RRR, those are all the ones from the data model. Now this is all. I want to move these data model ones to the active. If I click on active, there are no tables showing. So I'm going to right click each one and say Show in Active. Right click, Show in Active. Right click, Show in Active. Now we go over to Active, and there are all of the tables. We can drag and drop different columns from different tables and build our pivot table report. Now, in our pivot table example, we're not going to do a pivot table cross tab for revenue. We're just going to try and add the units. Actually, our next video will be about a big data example in Power Pivot, and I'll show you how to do the formulas in that version. But here we go. Product category down to rows. I get a unique list. Website name to columns. There's a unique list. And now when I drag units down to values, it has no problem adding the units from transaction and having these columns from other tables. Now let's highlight the pivot table, Control-C. Click a few rows below, Control-V. In the values area, we're going to change the calculation to % of grand total. Now, this is a different set of reports because this is for the sum of units. Now, think about this. All we did was use the relationship feature right here. We didn't even open up Power Pivot. Now, the thing is, in Office 365, all of us have Power Pivot. But in some of the earlier versions, you actually couldn't get the Power Pivot ribbon tab. But you were always able to use relationships. And that means that the data model is in every version of Excel, but Microsoft was just trying to sell the access to the ribbon tab in only some versions. All right, we have Office 365, so now I'm going to show you how to show this. Now, the first thing we have to do is go to File, down to Options, and we have to enable our Power Pivot. So we go down to Add-ins, and it's not Excel add-ins, it's COM add-ins. Click, click Go. And you want to check Power Pivot for Excel. Click OK. And now we see our ribbon tab there. This allows us to go and look at our data model. That button is also over in Data. Now, if you tried to click this in one of the other versions and you didn't have the right version with Power Pivot, it wouldn't let you go look. But we have the right version, so actually we can use the button in the Data ribbon tab or Power Pivot Data Model Manage. So I click. Now, this opens up the Power Pivot for Excel window. Down here, we can see these tabs. These are a preview of the tables that were added to the data model. Because actually, when you add tables to the data model, they are not stored like a regular Excel sheet with lots of duplicates. They're actually compressed into a columnar database. Now, next video, we'll actually add some big data to the columnar database, and we will be surprised at how small the file size is. But there are the tables. Up here in the Home Ribbon tab, over in View, we're in Data View. Let's go to Diagram View. Click. Now, this is Diagram View. Here are our tables. You can see a one-to-many relationship. One-to-many relationship. Now, over in Access, they used an infinity sign. Here, they use an asterisk. But if you click on the relationship, you can see this is product ID to product ID. Over here, website ID to website ID. Let's go back over to Data View. Now, to use the relationship feature and build a data model pivot table like we did, you actually don't have to come here and do anything. But we wanted to come behind the scenes and see exactly what was going on in this data model. Now, let's go jump back to Excel. This is a separate window from Excel, so I'm going to go back to Excel. I'm going to use the keyboard Alt-Tab to jump back over to Excel. This is the Excel window, Alt-Tab. This is the Power Pivot window. So just like Power Query, Power Pivot opens up in a separate window. Now, Alt-Tab back over to Excel. Now, something interesting happened when we dragged units down to values, because this is not a standard pivot table. This is a data model pivot table. Now, in a standard pivot table, we just drag fields down to the values, and it makes the calculations. But in a data model pivot table, when I dragged units down to here, it says sum of units. It actually added an official formula over in the data model. So let's go back over to our Power Pivot window, Alt-Tab. Just like there are tables, and just like there are relationships stored in this data model, there is a hidden formula stored in this data model when you drag and drop fields to the values area. Now, I don't know why they don't have this as the default, but you actually have to come to the Advanced Ribbon tab and click the Show Implicit Measure button. Now, when I click this button, there it is. If I expand the column and click down here, up in the formula bar, you can see that hidden formula that's created. Now, first, the word measure, that's the word they use for formulas that we drop into the pivot table. Implicit, that's the word they use when Power Pivot creates it for you automatically when you drag and drop a field into the values area. Explicit measure, that's what we'll create next video. That means we manually created the formula. Up here, this implicit measure, Power Pivot created it for us. Now, there's a bunch of drawbacks when you use implicit measures. So anytime you have big data, we're not going to do this. Now, it's perfectly all right and really convenient if you have a small data set to simply drag and drop the fields and create an implicit measure. The drawbacks to the implicit measures are that, well, the first thing is it's grayed out. We can't edit it. We can't change the name. We can't add automatic number formatting to it, as we will learn next video. And also, sometimes if you drag and drop a lot of fields, it creates all sorts of duplicate measures that you do not need. But when you have a small data set and you're using the relationship feature, no problem. You can drag and drop and create implicit measures. Now, this is our third example, and we created a data model by adding the 3 tables to the actual data model and our implicit measure and our relationships. Now, let's close the Power Pivot for Excel window. So in this epic video, we did data modeling where we used relationships in the data model to bring all 3 tables into our pivot table field list, then create our reports. With Power Query, we imported data from Access and Excel, did our data modeling inside of Power Query, and got 1 table into the pivot table field list. And then we created our reports. In our first example, our data modeling was done by adding extra columns with our spreadsheet formulas, in particular the VLOOKUP function. And then we created from our single table in our pivot table field list our reports. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excelisfun, including next EDAB number 8. We'll talk about big data coming from an SQL database, and we will use Power Pivot. All right, we'll see you next video.